We have an important oversight role in this committee. We oversee the Department of Justice, federal courts, federal antitrust policy, civil rights issues, federal law enforcement, and so much more. But we're not here today because of any of these legitimate areas for oversight. We're here today because after spending $20 million chasing dozens of conspiracy theories, MAGA Republicans have come up with nothing. In fact, the Republicans' stunning failure was made painfully obvious just yesterday when the Supreme Court ruled that the conspiracy theory underlying their signature investigation into social media companies was, quote, clearly erroneous. We're here today because there's a presidential debate tonight, and MAGA Republicans have decided the best way they can help President Trump is by bullying and intimidating a private citizen to obtain information about his highly sensitive and deeply personal conversations with President Biden. We're here today because Republicans are, in a word, desperate. This contempt resolution against Mrs. Zwonitzer is an abuse of the committee's oversight authority, pure and simple. Decorum and collegiality have clearly departed this chamber in favor of MAGA extremism when this committee harasses a private citizen to intimidate him into giving the chairman whatever he wants in his quest to find something damaging to use against President Biden. Earlier this week, we received a letter that White House counsel Ed Siskel sent to Mrs. Zwonitzer's attorney in which the White House said, quote, the committee's subpoena seeks broad swaths of personal information that President Biden provided to your client in confidence as part of the process for writing his memoirs. The vast majority of this information is private. The committee's subpoena is therefore a congressional subpoena for the president's information, which unavoidably pits the political branches against one another. Unfortunately, the committee has thrust your client into the middle of this interbranch conflict. The letter continues, quote, your client is not authorized to provide any of the president's information until it has been reviewed for executive branch confidentiality concerns and a resolution of these constitutional issues between the two branches has been reached, close quote. Mrs. Siskel also wrote to the chairman directly, advising him that, quote, the executive branch is ready and willing to engage in good faith with the committee in response to its purported interest in this matter. In other words, the committee's fight is not with Mr. Zwonitzer. It's with the executive branch, and that's who it should be negotiating with. And according to Mr. Siskel's letter to the chairman, Republicans have not engaged in negotiations with the White House at all. But we're not here today to engage in good faith negotiations. We're here today because the majority has instead chosen to bully and intimidate a private citizen because they think they can break him before they break the executive branch. They desperately want the audio recordings of Mrs. Zwonitzer's dozens of hours of private interviews with President Biden conducted when they worked together on Promise Me, Dad, a memoir detailing President Biden's loss of his son when he was vice president. I would like to read some of the entries from this book so that as we move forward with this ridiculous contempt proceeding today, we can all keep in mind what kind of information and recorded conversations Republicans want to acquire and weaponize against President Biden. In his book, the president recalls telling his dying son, quote, I will never stop doing everything I can to keep you alive, to keep you with us. It's okay if you go now. It's okay if you don't fight anymore. It's okay to go to sleep. He recalls his son telling him, you've got to promise me, Dad, that no matter what happens, you're going to be all right. Give me your word, Dad. You're going to be all right. President Biden recalls making an entry in his diary after his son's diagnosis, writing, quote, no Thanksgiving would ever be quite the same. I pulled out my diary and started to write. I did have one big item for my own Christmas list that year, but I was keeping it to myself. Naval Observatory, November 30th, 2014, 7:30 p.m. Just home from Nantucket. I pray we have another year together in 2015. Bo, 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 Bo. He recalled making another entry. As Air Force 2 took off, I felt compelled to open up my diary and write, March 29th, leaving MD Anderson with hope. Bo is an amazing man, as is Hunter. He is staying with Bo until the next procedure. I'll be coming back. I paused. What else was there to say? I was afraid if I really opened up, I would give in to a lurking despair, and I could not allow that to happen. I could not allow Bo or anyone else to see that, ever. I set aside the diary until the flight was nearly over, then picked it up again to add one line. Just landed, 6:07. I feel so goddamn lonely. He also recalls watching his son wither before his eyes. My eye was drawn to Bo as we talked. It wasn't yet late in the evening, but it was already tiring. He was so gaunt, and his face seemed drained of color. I could see the outlines of the leg brace through his pants. Bo had been losing recall of more and more proper nouns lately, and he seemed less willing to fight through it. Ashley, Bo's sister, had told me that Bo was no longer inviting her into the room for his speech therapy because his decline really bothered him. Bo said almost nothing that chilly February night in Washington. He would whisper something to his brother instead, and Hunter would speak for him. Unquote. I think most parents would agree, watching your child suffer and die is the worst possible torment you could imagine. And that tragedy, that heart-wrenching, gut-churning agony that President Biden endured is what Republicans want to use against him. Their desperation knows no bounds. And don't let them pretend here that they have compassion for President Biden's loss or that this request has anything to do with oversight. If this committee really wanted to conduct oversight, they would work in good faith with the DOJ and the White House, not employ intimidation tactics and punitive subpoenas against a private citizen. They don't want to conduct legitimate oversight. They want to get those audio files to help MAGA Republicans this election cycle. Mark my words, if Republicans get these files, their priority will be getting altered and context-free audio clips into Republican campaign ads, not doing the real work of the American people. This is about digging for embarrassing audio of President Biden when he was in a vulnerable state discussing the death of his son. This is about their political game. Oversight Chairman James Comer said so himself in an email. He said if he gets the tapes, he will release them for the purpose of demonstrating, quote, Biden's mental state to convince, quote, swing voters. What more evidence do you need? And in case I have to explain this, demanding material to bolster your political campaigns does not constitute the kind of legitimate legislative purpose that makes a subpoena enforceable in court. Despite Republicans' desperate attempts to feign a substantive need for these files, one simply does not exist. Today's markup is about making the chosen Republican leader, Donald Trump, happy by hunting down any possible vulnerabilities of President Biden. And to achieve that goal, this committee is willing to put a target on the back of an American citizen, a private American citizen who has already been cleared of wrongdoing in this very matter. Frankly, this is frightening. Trump is weaponizing this MAGA Republican-led committee to get information on his opponent, President Biden, at any cost, even if it means publicly flogging an American citizen trying to live a private life. And I have to wonder, is this just the beginning? Is this what we have to look forward to? If Trump gets a second term, is this the playbook? Anyone, public official or private citizen, who doesn't give Trump what he wants will have the weight of the government hammered down on them? Anyone who questions Trump's authority will have his name fed to Trump's ravenous far-right supporters to instill fear and submission. Anyone who asserts their constitutional rights to get in the way of a Republican agenda will be held in contempt by Trump's enablers in Congress. That is not an America I want to live in. That is not the American democracy I have devoted my career to fighting for. And I know this is not the country the American people want. Every American should sit up in fear watching this public attack on a private citizen. If he isn't safe from this kind of government abuse, what makes you think you are? I urge members to oppose this dangerous resolution, and I yield back.